Hello, my name is Sadie Berlin, and I am the curator of Rev-elations, part of the Meighen Forum. Rev-elations is a series highlighting older and hidden gems penned by Black playwrights. I would like to thank the Stratford Festival for asking Be Current Performing Arts, the company of which I am the artistic director, to partner with us on this endeavor. Every play discussed in these four reflections are a companion piece to the dramatized readings we will be presenting at the Lazaridis Hall of the Tom Patterson Theatre between the 25th and the 28th of August 2021. If you are unable to join us in person, you can still enjoy these conversations with us. Thank you. Hello. Today, we discuss William Wells Brown with Jordan Laffrenier. Hi, Jordan.
Hi, Sadie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Before I launch into a short bio for an extraordinary life, Jordan, why don't we begin with you and you can tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jordan Laffrenier. I am a dramaturg and director based out of Toronto. I'm really excited to be here and be working on this series with you, Sadie.
Yes, because you, Jordan, will be directing the first two iterations of this series, The Escape by William Wells Brown and a selection of short plays by Zola Neale Hurston. So, a bit of a bio, and this is a very, very abbreviated bio because this man packed about 20 lifetimes in one. William Wells Brown was born in slavery, and also perhaps because he was a bit of a self-mythologist. I'm not sure, but we're not sure exactly when he was born. But of course, this might have to do with the fact of the circumstances of his birth in enslavement. He was born in 1814. He escaped to the North in 1834. Now, he was very active politically and abolitionist, but it was really when the Fugitive Act of 1850 was passed, which made it easier for the capture of ex-slaves and for ex-slaves to be sent back to the South in re-enslavement. And so Brown lives in Europe to avoid being enslaved again. And the play that we are going to present, The Escape, was the first Black play published in the United States. Just a reminder that the play was written before the beginning of the Civil War. So, like Frederick Douglass, Brown was very much a pioneer and did the abolitionist lecture circuit, during which he would talk about political matters, but he would also read his plays. Brown's father was white, and his mother, who was a slave, had 7 children from seven different men. Some of those fathers were friends of her slave owner. So this is human history, and it's all of our history to confront and assess. Brown spent the mid-30s to mid-40s in Buffalo, helping what we think is 69 fugitive slaves get to Canada. He was a very successful recruiter for the temperance movement, which I thought was a 20th century phenomenon, but no. Brown got 500 Black folk to join the temperance movement in Buffalo when there were only 700 Black people living in the city at that time. So I am partial to alcoholic libation, but I must admit that I would probably feel left out if I wasn't invited to those parties, lectures, but this speaks to how compelling a man he was. Now, I want to start this discussion by talking about the fact that I programmed a play that depicts slavery. Slavery in the United States is a story that needed to be told. It's a story that young humans still need to learn, but they can learn it in documentaries, they can learn it in books, and the question is how to why portraying slavery in 2021, and what does that mean? And the audience might not be aware of a conversation that has been taking place in Canadian theater in the last few years. This discussion is about trauma on stage, how queer, Black, and Brown plays are often displaying trauma. And the notion is that we might be feeding a loop of trauma and creating a collective consciousness and and collective narrative around trauma that might be of great disservice to everyone involved. The damage that it does to performers performing trauma night after night after night, and how trauma comes to be identified with an intersection of humans to the exclusion of other stories. I think that the Black Joy movement that we've seen rise in the last few years is a response to this. And by the way, on Stratfest at home, you can find a 1 hour event called Black Joy that we recorded during Black History Month. I highly recommend it. But the question in theater right now becomes, how do those narratives impact the way we see ourselves and the way the majority sees us? And so we've been wondering if the audience, which almost always hails from the dominant culture, whether it finds catharsis in our traumas, and what does that mean? And so this is not to cast any dispersions on the audience, because we're the ones creating these shows, and arts leaders are the ones programming these shows. This comes from us. Just a little bit more context. I don't do screen work, but and so I don't know what those conversations have been in film and television. But I found it fascinating that Barry Jenkins, who directed Moonlight, which won the Academy Award for Best Film, and who directed The Great If Beale Street Could Talk, his Amazon Prime series called The Underground Railroad has really flown under the radar. And I have to admit, I've not been able to watch it. And then just a couple of weeks later, Amazon again released a series called Them about the Great Migration, which is something we will discuss in the Zola Neale Hurston conversation. This Black family moves to LA, and the TV show was condemned pretty uniformly across Black communities for being trauma porn. And so, Jordan, I wanted to talk to you about this. I'm the one who programmed this play. You accepted to direct it. What is the weight of presenting this play at this time?
I think whether or not people participate in any play is up to the individuals participating in that play. So there's no, not, the actors were invited to participate in this play with some consent, and the audience is also participating in this play with consent. I think that slavery is something that seems to get pushed under the rug quite often. And it seems like whenever we talk about it, there's always the rebuttal of, why are we talking about this so much? And, why are we still talking about slavery? That's the thing that we get so often. And I think that, I don't want to draw a direct comparison, but there are about 4 times, I believe, the number of movies about the Holocaust as there are movies about slavery. What that demonstrates to me is that there are certain histories that we are, as a society, just more willing to push under the rug. I think a lot of the problems that we have right now are problems that existed during slavery. Like we are directly still experiencing a lot of the pain and a lot of the suffering that came from that. I think when we think of, the issues with police brutality that we're facing right now, well, when we also think about the history of the police and where they started in America, the police started as slave catchers. So Williams Wells Brown tried to escape slavery 3 times before successfully escaping slavery, and each time was caught and brought back by a slave catcher. Those slave catchers had badges, and many of them, post the emancipation of slavery, became police officers. So this is directly rooted in the issues of police brutality that we're facing right now. Are directly rooted. If we go to the branches, if we go to the root of the problem, the roots are slavery. You know, looking at the prison industrial complex is another example. There's the beautiful documentary that came out a few years ago, 13, about the 13th Amendment and the idea that slavery was abolished, but not including prisoners. And there are now more Black men in prison than there were in slavery. What does that tell us? I think it tells us that we're still in many ways participating in this in American slavery. There are companies like McDonald's and Walmart and Victoria's Secret and Starbucks who all profit off of the prison industrial system, and yet we all still engage with those companies. And so I think, circling back to your question, I think the importance of telling these stories now is that we're still wrestling with it, that we can escape it. I know a lot of people didn't like to Get Out more, but I loved Jordan Peele's Us, because I think
Me
Us,
too.
yeah,
Yes.
and I think that he made Us for Black people. I think that was the big difference between Get Out and Us. I think Get Out was written for white people, and I think Us was written for Black people. And I think ultimately it's about the ghosts that we're all still contending with, and a lot of those ghosts being the history that we need to contend with.
Yes, and the mention of us is very interesting because it is also a film that tapped into things that were very uncomfortable for both Black and white people, which I think is why it was a success, but it was not recognized as such.
Yeah, and what I loved about it is that Black people didn't get off the hook. They weren't the magic Negroes that we see so often now, of being able to solve every problem, or being a culture that's rooted in peace. It was also being a part of ignoring the thing. What I find so fascinating about William Wells Brown as play is that it actually was, as you said, written in 1863, I believe.
Well, I don't know when it was written. It was published in 1858.
1858. So slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation was 1865. So it was written and published during slavery. One of the agreements that he had with Frederick Douglass and a few other free men was that in every depiction of slavery, they would tell the truth. So what's so fascinating about this account of slavery is that it's not a made up history. It's not even an imagined history or a researched history. It's something that he witnessed and that he experienced. Like, at times, this play is really funny. I love the scene. The play opens with this scene of this slave Cato, who the play largely follows, and I guess Cato is very close to the master, Dr. Wells, who's a doctor, and so he learns a lot about being in the medical profession from this doctor. And so he goes into one of the slave cabins, and in this slave cabin there are multiple men with pretty severe illnesses, and they're all screaming for the doctor, and he keeps saying, "I'm the doctor," and they're like, "Who's the doctor?" And he's like, "I'm the doctor," and they're like, "Who's the doctor?" And then for each one of them, he examines them and then goes, "Okay, I'll bleed you out and I'll give you 2 pills and then you'll be fine." There's something really funny about him doing these examinations and then giving everyone the exact same prescription at the end. I think at the heart of the story is really a love story um, about two slaves, Melinda and Glenn, who were married on the plantation and then separated. This is really at the heart of a lot of what Williams Brown Wells likes to talk about. I think that, as you mentioned, he was born into a family of 7 siblings, and he witnessed all of them be sold to different plantations during his life. He also witnessed a very brutal beating of his mother, who was uh, crying out in prayer, um, and immediately after witnessed her be sold off to a different plantation. William Wells Brown was what they called a soul driver. During his slavery, he would witness people being brought off the ship, be bought, sold, and then put onto the plantation. Like, he witnessed every aspect of slavery. but he also witnessed quite a few people be sold away from their loved ones and the trauma of that. And I think that is one of the things that he's really wrestling with in this play.
I think that the specifics are important to me. I think that I would take a very specific approach. I think if this was a full run, and if we were asking Black performers to perform this night after night after night, because I think that that's a different ask. I agree with you completely, but I also understand why some people feel discomfort about those slavery narratives, because they do take some space in terms of the corpus of the entire canon, the Black canon. I wanted to ask you about the touches of humor, because I think that it's going to be interesting to see how the audience reacts to the humor. Are they going to suppress their laughter? Are they going to just enjoy the moment and laugh?
The old acting lesson is, if you want to be funny, you have to tell the truth. And I think that what makes this so, like, what makes the humor in this play is that it is so true, or that it feels so true to his experience. And I also, yeah, I don't know how the audience is going to react, and I don't know how we will react to the audience reacting. Like, there, there might be those moments of like, wait, why are you laughing at that? But I think that in a lot of ways that it'll end up being like, it'll land a bit softer because there are Black performers performing it.
Yes, I can't wait to see Khadija Roberts Abdullah play Mrs. Gaines. That alone is going to be worth the price of admission. Get your tickets now. And so one thing that I think you can speak to are Brown's influences, and how that might have impacted the escape.
Brown was heavily influenced by Shakespeare and Oscar Wilde. I think one of the fascinating things about Brown is that after he escaped slavery, he learned how to read. So he spent nearly his entire life actually not even knowing how to read. And the language in this play is beautiful. Like, it's really beautiful. There are words that I was like, what does that word mean? Like, it's not like it's not like he wrote this with a weak pen. He wrote it with a very, very strong tongue. I think you see his influences in this. It starts with a quote from Hamlet. It's, look on this picture and on this. Look on this picture and on this. And I don't know. I've been struggling. I've been trying to figure out why he started with that quote. Like, there's so many quotes from Hamlet that you could start with.
Yes.
One thing that I like about it is that it made me really reflect and try to think about what it meant. And the other thing I like about it is that it does show that this story contains multitudes. It's not just one story. And you do, I think, just like us, you do see that these Black people aren't perfect. These slaves aren't perfect. They're not these perfect figures that were trapped into slavery. They were human beings that were trapped into slavery. You witness them do things for their own survival. You witness them do things for their survival of others, and you witness them do things that are just evil in this play. What I like about that is that it reminds me that slaves were human. They weren't just figures who died so that we could be free. They were human beings.
The levels of language attached to the characters are not along racial lines. So the lovers, Melinda and Glenn, are given this heightened. I think that the closest way to describe it, I don't know if you'll agree, is Victorian purple prose. And someone like Cato, his language is very much vernacular.
I know from the introduction to the play that the two lovers, Melinda and Glenn, were based on two actual slaves. The language stands out so much in this play, and the vernacular stands out so much. And in first reading that first soliloquy from Glenn, it was like, oh, this is a slaveholder that I'm reading the soliloquy from. And then you read it a little bit more, and you're like, oh,
Yes.
this is a slave. I think that Brown did that quite deliberately. I think that the lovers understand something about the world that no one else does. And they understand that what they understand is that love is really important, and probably, not to be cliche, but that love conquers all. I think that because of that, he gave them this heightened language that even, you're right, like a lot of the slaveholders in this play, their language isn't perfect. But Glenn and Melinda, they almost come off as like these perfect speakers of the language. And I think, I think it's quite deliberate, and I think it's to show us that they understand something that we a lot of the time don't.
Yeah, so Jordan, you've had a chance to dig a little bit into Brown's life, and I was wondering if you told me the circumstances or conditions in which he wrote the Escape.
He wrote The Escape during slavery, while slavery was still present in America, and I think something that's important to mention is that during the height of slavery, slaves were worth more than all of the railroads and all of the factories. Anything that made money in America, slaves were worth more. Like the combined, all of American infrastructure combined wasn't worth as much as the slave trade. The average slave went for about from $800 to $1,000. So they were quite expensive. They weren't, sometimes people could afford one or two. Very rich people could afford a lot more. There was a lot of things that were making slavery possible. A big part of that was money. And I think, one of the things that we witness in this play is how tied slaveholders were to their slaves. Rev-elation wrote, "Southern whites cannot talk, walk, sing, think of love, family, or freedom without responding to the presence of Negroes. They are intertwined links in faith." Brown's mother had 7 different lovers who she bore children with, and one of those lovers was another slaveholder who bore Brown. And I think something that's really fascinating is there's not a lot of research that's been done about William Brown's mother, and William Brown's work isn't archived anywhere. There's no archive of his work. But it seems that his mother might also have a slaveholder father, which means we're talking about a man who was actually only a quarter white. And I think it's really, what does it mean that even those people were enslaved? His mother was also a breeder, what they call the slave breeder. She was particularly born into slavery to breed other slaves. She probably had her first child at 13 years old. Like from the time that she could have children, she was probably having children. To suggest that there's any level of consent there, absolutely there wasn't. Like there was no her wanting to be with these men. It was just that was her way, that was her livelihood, that was it. That was what she was born to.
Thank you so much, Jordan.
Thank you, Sadie.